AHLA is pleased to present this special series highlighting the top 10 health law issues of 2022, where we bring together thought leaders from across the health law field to discuss the major trends and developments of the year. Support for AHLA in this series is provided by PYA, which helps clients find value in the complex challenges related to mergers and acquisitions, clinical integrations, regulatory compliance, business valuations and fair market value assessments, and tax and assurance. For more information, visit pyapc.com.
Well, Jody, it's so nice to be able to talk today about you are the number 3 in the top 10 articles or items this year, and yours really is related to pandemic-related enforcement and oversight. So we're gonna talk a little bit about that today. Your article and a couple of questions and thoughts that have come to my mind as I've read through it. So, by way of introduction, I'm a partner with principal with PYA. I'm in our Atlanta office, and I spend a lot of my time in the compensation valuation, service valuation, compliance, regulatory space, and am interested and curious to hear what your thoughts are about what 2022 and the future will look like. So I'll turn it over to you for introductions as well.
Well, thank you. Good morning. It's great to be here, and thanks for taking the time to read the top 10 article and meet with me today. So I am a law partner at Hush Blackwell. I am in our Austin office, although my practice isn't limited to Austin or even to the state of Texas for that matter. I've been in the healthcare space for a long time. I'm a former federal prosecutor in the Northern District of Texas, and that has parlayed itself into just a number of matters, civil and criminal, that involve government investigations, and sometimes the eruption of those into False Claims Act lawsuits or criminal indictments or both, and largely but not exclusively in the healthcare space. So it's good to be here to talk about this new issue that we are on the precipice of, as we've all been dealing with the rather unprecedented pandemic and its aftermath over the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you kicked it off nicely in your article, where you talked about sort of the number of relief, assistance, and monetary protections that businesses, healthcare systems, hospitals have had available to them via things like the CARES Act and the enactment of the CARES Act. And I think one of the things that was interesting when you talk about, those recipients are really bearing, the responsibility for spending those funds within certain program guidelines. But one of the things that I think you touched on that I know we've experienced with several of our clients is it's just really difficult to keep up with all of those guidelines, and they're ever evolving, they're changing. And I really liked the words you used of sort of uneven guidance. So it's kind of like the shifting sands you're constantly trying to figure out. And one of the other things I really liked is you said that it's a recipe for that it's a recipe ripe for years of enforcement efforts. And as I was sort of looking through the OIG work plan, specific to sort of COVID and pandemic related opportunities, one of the things that came out was that it looks like there are 2 audits that they've identified as part of the 2022 work plan. And I was really curious. They say they're going to kick off potentially in 2022, but as you said, you just don't know what's going to occur. And I was curious as to your thoughts on when we think we might be seeing some of that activity, and we'll talk a little bit about too, and some other questions about how organizations can best prepare. But would love your crystal ball thoughts as we go into this year.
Yeah, gee, I wish I had one. So let me back up just a tiny bit, because there are so many facets to the CARES Act relief programs. And of course, a lot of the really early efforts in enforcement activity are what you might call the lower hanging fruit. And that's just the, straight up abject fraud, or alleged fraud on the Paycheck Protection Program in particular, but not exclusively. And we're already seeing a number of investigations and, hotline reports, and even now prosecutions and guilty pleas and so on in the PPP loan fraud arena, in addition to other, pandemic related fraud. The longer tail, and I think the more complicated timeline, which is I think what you're getting at, is the provider relief fund and the relief packages that are very specific to the healthcare industry, that came in the tranches of provider relief fund monies. And that has been a difficult, rollout. There was, as you point out, a lot of shifting guidance on entitlement to those funds and on the spending of those funds. And now, of course, the OIG has indicated that it intends to audit the receipt and then the use of those funds here in its 2022 work plan. Crystal ball, gosh, I would imagine we're going to start seeing real audit related work probably in Q2 and the second half here of 2022. Part of that is going to depend on Omicron and on the degree to which this particular variant or anything that follows impacts the ability of people to be at work and, get their jobs done, as opposed to needing to quarantine or, God forbid, being incredibly sick and that impacting, the number of people who are available to do this work. But putting that aside, I think it's going to be very important to the federal government to begin auditing and begin policing and begin looking into the receipt and the expenditure of those funds. And so, all things being equal, I would imagine second half of 2022, we're going to start seeing that activity happening. I will say, as just a follow-on comment before I turn the floor back over to you, that I think those audits are going to be kind of lengthy. So although they may start, in the second half of 2022, I'm not sure they'll finish that quickly. This is going to be very paperwork intensive and, calculator heavy, and a lot of sharpening of pencils and meetings and rooms. And so I'm not sure that it's going to be a quick process, even if it begins quickly.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you and I have also talked about is the fact that there are going to be some unfortunate souls that are going to be the number ones that get selected for these. And kind of like other regulatory and compliance audits, we're probably gonna learn a lot from those that have been the random or like I said, sort of unfortunate ones that are not necessarily volunteering to do this, but will be important to watch just to see what we can learn and what some of the things are that other organizations can take away. Because as you said, I don't think this is going to be a one and done. This is probably going to be a continuing into the future number of years. So
just to say something about your point, which is so well taken, I wonder the degree to which this is going to be public record, available to those of us watching within the industry. At the end of the day, if there's some kind of settlement with the federal government because funds were received inappropriately or spent inappropriately, what will be the nature of confidentiality that will cloak that process? I'm not sure, but you're so right, that those who are unfortunate enough to be the initial guinea pigs of these audits will be important for all of us to have our eyes on to the extent we can.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I think you also talked about was adhering to guidance and guidelines. And, obviously, if it's constantly changing, or if it has changed, that makes it all the more difficult. And especially as you also said, I think, while we all had hoped that we would sort of plateau with where we are with the pandemic, it seems like we're taking another dip, which means that individuals that are in the compliance and regulatory space and hospitals and health system settings are really having to juggle a number of priorities that they likely had not planned on going into this year. And so as you think about prioritization and preparing for an audit like this, or thinking through what the guidelines and guidance have been, how do you sort of guide, and what would you say are sort of the number one things that would be best practice, or that somebody should focus on, knowing that we've sort of got this eye on us now, but knowing we've also got some limited resources? So what are kind of the low-hanging fruit from the audit preparation side, if you will?
Yeah, that's boy, that's a complicated question, because of course, patient care and all of the issues that surround patient care, obviously must come first, and the safety of everyone who's working in these health systems and provider organizations is paramount. But I think it is really critical, to the extent resources allow, to be prepared up front, meaning you've got a dedicated person or small team that is keeping up with all of the paperwork that surrounds the receipt and expenditure of provider relief funds, and keeping up with any guidance or any, sort of new articles or new pronouncements by the government. And it, if you liken it to just keeping a notebook, print it off if you see it and put it in the notebook. Because the hardest thing to do in an audit situation or an enforcement situation is to try to go back and reinvent the wheel and try to remember what you did because of what you were thinking, because of what was available to you on a particular day. And the problem with viewing things in the rearview mirror is that we often take today's knowledge and we try to impute it to actions that we took a year ago or 2 years ago. And that doesn't often inure to the benefit of the person whose actions are under scrutiny. And so contemporaneous documentation that is coupled with contemporaneous actions is really helpful when you're viewing things, in a rearview mirror situation. So I would, if it's not already happening, I would make sure that I have in my organization, a timeline. This is what we did, and this is why we did it, and this is the information that we had when we made the decision to do it. And then I would task a person or persons to just keep up with, this is how things changed or are changing, and this is what we're doing about it, so that if the time comes, we're not reinventing the wheel retrospectively. We have all of the contemporaneous stuff that existed when we did what we did. And that includes maybe, having one person who just keeps up with, for example, the current OIG work plan. Log on, get on the website every week or 2 weeks, see if there's anything new out there, get some Google alerts or some other research alerts that help you keep up with, is there public information about who's being audited and what's happening, or what the government is interested in these audits? And then, keep a team in place that maybe meets monthly or weekly or whatever is appropriate to sort of make sure that we know how the money is being spent, or that, we have this reserve fund and this is where it is and this is what's happening with it. So that, again, if and when these questions get asked in an audit situation, it's right here in front of us rather than scrambling. I would much rather have any organization be prepared unnecessarily than be unprepared and scrambling.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I really like about what you said was it's not just the documentation of what you did. It's the kind of the why you did it based on the guidance at that time, because just given how fast a lot of this has moved, you know, a month, a week, 2 weeks, you might not really, you know, and even into the future, to your point, remember sort of what the rationale was for doing what you did then. And that, I think, is really, you know, sort of maybe takes some practice in terms of working it into that routine from an audit perspective. But the why you did it and what the rationale at the time for doing it was, I think maybe, you know, me not being the attorney, but somebody with your background in advising a hospital or a physician practice or you know, the like going forward would say that's probably a good practice, obviously with, you know, kind of within reason. But yeah, I think it will be interesting to see, and I'm sure, hopefully, I've seen some organizations who've sort of been just via chat rooms putting things like best practices out there, and kind of going from there. So sort of using each other's as peers, and then reaching out obviously to their trusted advisors when they kind of get stuck and need some guidance. You kind of touched on this, but sort of the tips and tricks for keeping up with changing guidelines and new information that comes out. I know you mentioned sort of having someone dedicated, and I think, you know, some of those alerts and publications from the OIG are helpful, but are there any other things that you can think of that maybe you've used in your practice or worked with clients on that have really kind of helped cut through all of the fast pace or ways that you would advise somebody to proceed, because, you know, you've kind of got a full spectrum. You've got probably some facilities and organizations that aren't necessarily able to have sort of that dedicated person, to larger organizations that maybe are able to do that more effectively. So, and any other sort of tips and tricks that you can think of?
Well, I love the idea of the kind of the discussion group. You know, if there isn't somebody who's available within the organization, you know, or there are maybe budget constraints, we lawyers can get expensive, you know, experts such as yourself can get expensive. I do love the idea of kind of industry discussions. You know, there may be a monthly lunch where industry insiders sort of get together and just, you know, just share information or ideas or, you know, news articles that this one might have seen, that this one might not have seen. I think that's smart. You know, you want to be careful that you know, no one is telling each other what to do or providing, you know, inappropriate or unnecessary guidance to one another. You know, there are lines, but the mere sharing of information and sort of help, I think, can be a great, free, and really helpful way to kind of pick one another's brains and make sure that everybody is staying on top of, again, evolving or potentially evolving information. The other thing is, you know, we who are in the legal industry or you, you know, the experts, we're pretty good at, if we come across something that looks like, we better share this, we're pretty good at sending out, you know, the article or a link to something that we saw online, because it's important to us that our clients stay abreast of new information that may be coming out there. So to the extent that an organization has, you know, lawyers that are, you know, their trusted advisors, I think I would ask, if the lawyers aren't already doing it, just, hey, you know, if you come across something that you think might be helpful to us, be sure you let us know. And certainly the lawyers that I work with and am aware of are really good about doing that, and I'm sure would continue to be. So I guess I would add that to the list, to the extent that an organization doesn't already have somebody who's proactively out there seeking and informing. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, I know for me, you know, some of the you know, it's not really a listserv, but it's more the the publications that the OIG and the DOJ that they push out daily. I mean, I know it's easy to kind of miss them because, you know, when you get lots of emails and, you know, you find your trusted source, you know, you find your trusted, you know, AHLA summary of the day, you know, you look at your OIG, you know, the work plan. I think the OIG work plan is just changed over the years, how they've published those updates. And I think you and I just recently talked about how that just seems to, you blink and something else is on there. And so you really do have to kind of keep up with that. But what do you want? I guess one sort of final thought and question is what about sort of preparation or preparatory audits that somebody should do? You know, I know sometimes we see that on, you know, like with 340B or with some other type of audits that the government that we find is going to be doing. So it's sort of more like your own proactive audit to see I mean, is there any value, even though this is so new, it's a little bit of an interesting concept, but, you know, maybe one way to test the ability of your record keeping is, you know, if you were to have to kind of go back and do a pretend audit, you know, do you feel like you'd be prepared? Again, limited time and limited resources may not come into play, but that might also be something that organizations might think about.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I want to circle back to something you said a few minutes ago about, you know, we can all get busy and it can be just sort of challenging, even overwhelming to keep up with those emails that come in and so on. And I remember when I was a very young associate, one of the partners in my firm was giving this address to those of us about, you know, tips and tricks, you know, for how to develop our law practice and how to be good lawyers. And I remember to this day that she said, read some more, keep reading. And I scratched my head even at that time and thought, how does a person have time? How do you have time? I mean, how can you keep up with all of this? But you not only need to find time to do that, it can be really critical, especially in this scenario, to make sure that you do dedicate 5-10 minutes a day to, even if you're just scrolling the headlines, you know, figure out who on Twitter is going to inform you best on these issues, or which of those many emails or podcasts or, you know, that you can spend 5-10 minutes a day paying attention to. I just think that's so important. To your point about the practice audits, what a great idea. Yeah, I'm not, you know, I'm not sure in the cost benefit analysis, you know, it's so challenging to know who is going to really be subject to these audits and therefore who is undertaking that task, perhaps unnecessarily, but I think it's tremendous. Yeah.
Well, and you know, what's been interesting for me is sort of through this process is just to sort of watch how folks, you know, from various different parts, especially in our organization and probably on the legal side too, where, you know, you're really having to pull specialists from various different healthcare, whether it's, we mentioned earlier, finance, legal, compliance, operation. It's a whole team of people that have had to come together. So it really has been, I think, opportunities for collaboration. So in an era where in some ways we're all less connected, we're all sort of more connected and collaborative because we've got to figure all this out together. And it sort of takes the perspectives of some different people, which I think is somewhat unusual from maybe some of the other regulatory, maybe not, but it just, for us, it feels like it's really had to be a collaborative pulling of the resources to really, because nobody can read it all and be the expert in all of it as quickly. So it's sort of that divide and conquer, which I think has probably helped a lot of us get through some of it.
Yeah, you know, it brings up an interesting point, which I can't offer legal advice on, and I won't. But you know, the kind of the what happens if you identify what you consider to be perhaps you know, a misuse of funds or a lack of entitlement to the funds to begin with. That's got some thorny issues involved there, which would require, I think, the seeking of skilled legal counsel. But yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Well, it's clearly, you know, I think in your column, you touched on a lot of different things at a high level, but with enough granularity that you know, we're all starting to ask questions. And just as you and I have been talking, I think we've probably uncovered a couple more things that maybe in preparing for this, we hadn't even thought about. So I think just being able to continue these conversations and use each other as you know, colleagues to share information and read will just prove to be invaluable in the future. So I just want to thank you for spending time with me and for sharing your insights. And is there anything else that I may have missed that you think would be helpful, or should we save that for another day when we 6 months from now, when we see if any of this has come to fruition?
I don't think you've missed anything. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm grateful to AHLA for letting us get together this morning, and to you for these terrific questions. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great, and certainly appreciate it.